"The till's doing the thing again, Agnes," Sarah huffed from behind the counter, repeatedly tapping at the unresponsive screen as though sheer force of will, or her mounting profanities, might coax it back to life. Standing on her tiptoes to peer over today's delivery dumped in front of the counter, she caught a glimpse of Mrs. Turnbull, who was carefully shelving boxes of headache pills. The older woman didn't immediately respond, her focus unwavering as she aligned the rows with a precision that seemed more ritual than necessity. "Agnes!" Sarah called again, louder this time. I'm coming," Mrs. Turnbull replied with a sigh, setting down the box she was holding and carefully manoeuvring her way off the stepping stool she was perched on. "What's it doing now?" she asked gently, brushing off her hands as she limped over to the counter. Mrs. Turnbull was feeling her age recently. She knew it wouldn't be long before that short step on the stool would be one step too far. At 70 years young, it was common knowledge that she resented the fact she still had to work here, but secretly, she loved the company. Her retirement from Drexel Family Pharmacy at 68 was a bittersweet occasion filled with heartfelt speeches, teary goodbyes, and an incredibly tasty cake. But just 2 years later, she found herself back behind the counter, her return a quiet reminder that the world had changed in ways she hadn't expected. Mrs. Turnbull had looked forward to her retirement, expecting a well-earned rest after decades of hard work. Her pension had been modest, but enough to cover her living expenses and enjoy a quiet life in the small cottage her husband had purchased for them many moons ago. But that security was short-lived. With the government's new initiative aimed at redistributing wealth, single female pensioners were targeted viciously. The Council of Fathers had implemented harsh measures to force elderly women like her into government-funded homes, supposedly for their own good. Mrs. Turnbull had seen the rise of the so-called sanctuary program, which had been marketed as a compassionate solution to the issue of elderly women living alone. In reality, it was a thinly veiled attempt to strip elderly women of their independence and control their lives. Women over 65 who lived alone were encouraged, pressured really, to move into government-funded communal housing complexes, ironically named sanctuary buildings. These buildings were overcrowded, sterile, and soulless. Personal belongings were strictly limited due to space issues, and every aspect of the women's lives was regimented, from mealtimes to curfews. Freedom was replaced with surveillance cameras to ensure compliance with the council's rules. Houses were forcibly sold, and the money was used to fund little more than holding pens, places where elderly women were forgotten by society until they quietly passed away. Mrs. Turnbull had seen some of her closest friends bow under the pressure, their pensions drained and their independence gone. The economic stranglehold placed on women rippled through society in countless ways. Single women across the country, earning barely enough to scrape by, found themselves trapped in lives of dependency. Women like Sarah resisted, refusing to accept the roles the council had defined for them, but for many, like Mrs. Turnbull, it was an exhausting fight. The council slowly started to chip away at her weekly pension, reducing it pound by pound in an effort to, in her words, starve her into submission. The plot had worked on some of her friends, the pull of free housing too strong whilst their bodies remained too weak to fight back. She resisted, living off her meagre savings until it got so severe that she struggled to even heat her home in the winter, and soon her savings were gone. Reluctantly, she returned to the only thing she knew well, the pharmacy. It wasn't the ideal choice, but it was her choice, and, with no other options, she took what work she could. Soon learned that it wasn't just the pensions they were chipping away at. She came back to work to find that the gender pay gap was no longer a debate. It was a brutal reality. The council had decreed that, as part of the wealth redistribution, women's wages were meant to reflect their true role in society, which was only ever meant to be to look after the home, raise children, and be looked after by a husband. Working women, like herself and Sarah, were seen as little more than hobbyists, their labour not worth a proper wage. It was a forced incentive to marry quickly and take your proper place in society. But women like Sarah still resisted. She refused to let the Father's counsel dictate her worth. She made the conscious decision not to marry. Mrs. Turnbull knew she clung to the values her late father had instilled in her, that women were equal, capable and deserving of the same rights as any man. Mrs. Turnbull had been married once many years ago to Ivan, who had passed away far too young. Now, with no one left to look after her, she was forced to make ends meet, her small pension already slashed to the bone. She admired Sarah's stance, but with the council breathing down her neck to conform, she wasn't entirely opposed to the idea of finding someone again, for financial security, of course, though the ache in her joints reminded her that she was no spring chicken. And the thought of starting over wasn't exactly appealing, but, as they say, desperate times made strange bedfellows. Mrs. Turnbull was jolted out from under the weight of her thoughts with a thump as her foot collided with the boxes in front of Sarah. "Oh, goodness me!" she exclaimed, grimacing through the now added pain to her day. She leaned on the counter, trying to relieve some of the pressure in her throbbing shin. Peering at the screen, she asked, "What thing would this be today, dear?" Sarah threw her arms up in exasperation. The usual. The freezing, the beeping, and, my personal favourite, the little spinning circle of doom. She jabbed at the screen again to no avail. "I've tried everything, tapping it, jabbing it, threatening its family. Honestly, where's Alex when you need him? He might not do much, but he's the only one who can charm this crap into working." "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" Mrs. Turnbull smirked. "Have you tried shoving it up your—" The jingle of the shop doorbell interrupted Sarah's crude retort, just in time. They looked up in unison to find a robust, smartly dressed man enter the store without even acknowledging their presence. He turned directly down an aisle, his polished shoes clicking against the floor tiles. Sarah sighed, leaning closer and lowering her voice. "Customers are going to start lining up, and the last thing I need is some bloke ranting about how women can't even work a till." Mrs. Turnbull straightened up, brushing off her apron. "Well, let's see what we can do before that happens. Step aside, dear. Sometimes it just needs a firm hand." With a swift but cautious smack to the side of the monitor, Mrs. Turnbull muttered, "Come on, you stubborn old thing." The screen flickered momentarily but stayed frozen. "Having a little trouble there, ladies?" Both women turned abruptly, startled to find the man now standing at the counter, leaning casually on it with an air of smug superiority. "Modern machines can be tricky," he continued, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Suppose that's why they're usually operated by, more technical minds." His gaze lingered just long enough to make the insult land, though he wore the faintest veneer of plausible deniability. Sarah's jaw clenched, but before she could speak, Mrs. Turnbull placed a calming hand on her arm. "And yet here you are, sir," she replied with a polite, tight-lipped smile. "What can we help you with today? Have you tried, turning it off and on again?" The words came out smoothly, but the smug delivery turned a mundane suggestion into an insult. It was Sarah's turn to practice self-restraint now. She straightened and folded her arms. "We appreciate your concern, sir, but I think we'll manage just fine without your technical expertise. What can we help you with today?" The man shrugged. "I'm after something for my wife. Strong painkillers. She's been struggling with migraines, poor thing." Mrs. Turnbull, still nursing her throbbing shin, straightened her posture. "We've just stocked some excellent migraine relief," she said, her voice professional but kind. "Clinically proven to work just as well as prescriptions. Let me show you—" "Those won't work," the man interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut. "She has another pain too. Needs something stronger. You've got the ones behind the counter, don't you? I've had them for her before. Dormex?" Mrs. Turnbull's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't need to ask why he insisted on those specific pills. They were infamous for their side effects, chief among them, extreme drowsiness. She gave a measured nod, glancing briefly at Sarah, who was watching the interaction intently. "Ah, those ones," Mrs. Turnbull said, her tone suddenly light. "Well, it's unfortunate timing. As you know, Till's acting up again." She gestured to the frozen screen with an apologetic shrug. I'm afraid I can't process any restricted medication sales right now. The man's expression darkened. Surely there's another way to ring it through. My wife's in a lot of pain. You wouldn't want to deny her relief, would you? No, sir. Not at all, sir. However, we aren't technically minded enough to fix the till issue alone, sir. But I will suggest, if her pain's that severe, sir, it might be better for her to see a doctor. Migraines combined with other pains could mean something more serious, and you wouldn't want to deny her relief, would you? For a moment, the man hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her firm refusal. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but found no ground to stand on. With a curt nod, he stepped back. Obviously not. I'll sort it elsewhere. Red-faced, the man turned on his heel and clicked his way down the aisle, straight out the door. As the bells jingled a final time, Sarah exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. That was unsettling. Was that too many sirs? Mrs. Turnbull smirked. Why didn't you just sell it to him? You could have just written it down until the till was sorted. He looked like he was in a hurry, and his wife probably really needs it. Mrs. Turnbull paused, her gaze lingering on the closed door. She sighed deeply before turning back to Sarah. It's not always about what they say, dear. It's about what they don't say. Sarah frowned. What do you mean? Mrs. Turnbull picked up a box of the newly stocked migraine tablets and tapped it lightly against the counter. These are more than enough for migraines, more than enough for most things, actually. If it were truly about her pain, he'd have taken these without argument. But the ones he wanted, they're strong, too strong for a simple headache. They do more than numb pain. They knock you out. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. You think... I've been in this world long enough to know what some men will do when they think no one's watching. And I've seen far too many women come in here, black and blue, pretending they tripped over the furniture or have been too drunk to remember a one-night stand. Mrs. Turnbull's voice softened. I wasn't about to help him make her life worse. Sarah glanced at the door again, the man's polite veneer suddenly tinged with something sinister in her mind. I know there are some shitty guys out there, but I didn't think... Mrs. Turnbull gave her a sad smile. We've got to look out for each other, Sarah. I didn't get to 70 by handing out knockout pills to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Or, in his case, just Dick. In that case, then, she said, straightening her posture. Yes! Far too many sirs. Mrs. Turnbull watched the door for a moment longer, her lips pursed in thought. Yes, she quietly agreed, centering herself. With a deep breath in and out, she turned back to Sarah. Right then, let's see about this till. Reaching under the counter, she winced as the sharp ache in her shin reminded her of the earlier mishap with the boxes. I'll be feeling that for days, she muttered, gingerly lowering herself to the plug socket. She flicked the switch off, counted 30 elephants, and then turned it back on. Rising slowly, she rubbed at her knee before glancing at the screen expectantly. After a moment of blank stillness, the till's screen flickered back to life with a mechanical beep, ready for use as though nothing had happened. Sarah stared at it, slack-jawed. Are you freaking kidding me? After all that? I swear this thing has a personal vendetta against me. Mrs. Turnbull straightened up, a small smirk tugging at her lips. Sometimes, dear, even the most stubborn things just need a proper reset. She turned to Sarah, raising a knowing brow. Now, shall we get back to work, or do you need a moment to apologize to the machine? Sarah folded her arms in mock defiance. I'll apologize when it apologizes. Mrs. Turnbull chuckled softly, brushing off her apron as she returned to the shelves. We'll see about that.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening. That was the third chapter of my new novel, What Remains of Us. The full novel is available to buy now on Amazon, and it's free to read with Kindle Unlimited. You can also find it through most good online retailers. I've popped the links in the description below. I'll be posting the entire book here, chapter by chapter, so you can listen to the whole thing for free. This channel is something I'm building in my spare time, with the hope that one day I can turn my writing into a full-time career. Everything you hear is written by me, and if you'd like to support the journey, I've set up a Patreon too, links in the description. Thanks again for being here. If you enjoyed the story, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. It really helps more than you know. See you in the next chapter.